I'm really excited to welcome Rabbi Jeremy Markiz to teach our weekly Tikva through text. This class, of course, is focused on finding hope. We need a little tikva, we need a little hope right now. Rabbi Markiz is originally from the West Coast, but lives in the DC area. He is a writer, a rabbi, and a consultant. And I'm going to share my screen now so that we can say the blessing for study together. So I'll invite you, if you'd like, you can unmute and we'll say this blessing together, and then we'll turn things over to Rabbi Markiz to teach our class. Please join me. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok divrei Torah. Which means in Hebrew, blessed is the eternal source of the universe, whose mitzvot bring holiness to our lives, and who commands us to immerse, to engage, la'asok, in words of Torah. I'll turn things over to Rabbi Jeremy Markiz. Take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you. So happy to be here with all of you, especially around this topic about hope. I couldn't agree more about how needed that is for us. We're going to, the way that this next time period for us is going to work is I'm going to share a framework and some texts that I think support that framework, where it comes from. We'll be looking into the book of Jeremiah, among other things. And my hope is that we'll have some time to discuss it in the end, and then I'll sort of summarize for us at the end after that about our takeaway and what we should do from here. Can everybody hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up. Fantastic. I love it. I'm going to share my screen so you can see. Give me a thumbs up if you can see this okay. Yeah? Awesome. Just going to make sure I can see you all okay. Great. So we begin our learning today, our story, if you will, talking about exile. The people are in exile in Babylonia. We're in process. And we have Jeremiah the prophet to speak to that challenge, that situation that we find ourselves in. Now, I want to offer as our framework for exile, not to think geographically, or even necessarily spiritually, but a sense of what it means to be in exile, to feel alone, to feel isolated, to feel far away, to feel misaligned in some way. And that's the way I want you to hold the concept of exile. Jeremiah says the following: "For I know of the plans, machshavot, that I have made concerning you, declares God, plans for your welfare, for shalom, not for disaster, l'ra'ah, so to bad or to evil, to give you a hopeful end, acharit v'tikva." The text itself gives us a hint that the subject matter we're discussing is hope. And this is what Jeremiah says: V'karatem oti v'halachtem v'hitpalaltem elai. When you call me and you go out and you pray to me, v'shamati alechem, I will hear you. Ubikashtem oti umatzatem ki dirshuni tidrashuni v'chol levavchem. You will search for me, you will find me if you seek me wholeheartedly. This is the framework we're going to use to talk about hope. Seeking, calling out to God, engaging in the process, striving, taking action and moving forward, and sustaining. How do we do so with authenticity and wholeheartedness? I'm going to offer that hope is not wishful thinking or waiting. It's an action. It's a process. And so we have to ask ourselves a little bit about what does that look like in real life? How do we do these sort of three verbs: seek, strive, and sustain? Now, I want to be really, really careful here. This text starts with the idea that God has a plan. That may not align with your theology. To be totally honest, it doesn't really align with mine all that much. We don't rely on God's plan if God has one. We can't suggest, I'm certainly not going to suggest that it solves every problem. We have to act as if there is no plan, or that our actions are the plan. We can't be certain that God is going to save us. We have to do the work. So I want to sort of name from the outset this idea that, yes, this text has plan, but we're not relying on it. And so we're going to step one step farther back to the text that precedes our framework here. Jeremiah says the following: "Thus said the God of hosts, the God of Israel, to the whole community that I exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon." So now we're in exile. What does Jeremiah tell us to do, or God tell us to do? Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat their fruit. You shall take wives and beget sons and daughters. You shall take wives for your sons and your daughters to husbands, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there, do not decrease. And seek the welfare of the city to which I have exiled you, and pray to God in its behalf, for in its prosperity you shall prosper. I'm going to pause there. We'll read the end. Exile could have felt like it was the end. We might think that our job is to wait for redemption, to long for the past. But Jeremiah tells us something radical. Don't wait. Build homes, establish communities, plant gardens, create families, be engaged in the place that you live. Hope isn't passive, it's engagement with the present. Because if they were just waiting, they wouldn't plant gardens or build homes. You don't plant a garden unless you believe it's going to grow. This is seeking hope in action. It's calling out to God through our engagement with life itself. And this is the nuance here, is at the end. For thus said, I'm right here at the bottom of the paragraph. For thus said the God of hosts, the God of Israel, let not the prophets and diviners in your midst deceive you. Pay no heed to the dreams that they dream. For they prophesy to you in my name falsely. I did not send them, declares God. So what is he talking about here? I think what Jeremiah is talking about are the false prophets who tell us to disengage. Right, what's the distinguishes real hope from delusion or wishful thinking? False hope tells us to sit back and wait. It's all going to be fine. Real hope demands action, that we do something, even when the future is unclear. We have this interesting text right here, providing for us a guidance that we can't stand where we are. We have to keep moving. And this is hinted at, I'm going to scroll back up to the top here. This is hinted at in the text itself. It says, when you seek me, right, seeking, taking action, v'halachtem. Let's see, hopefully we're not too blue here. Yeah, too blue. V'halachtem is our verb here. To walk, to go. This isn't happening in one place. This is happening in movement, in motion. This is going to be very confusing for a second. There's a book called Sefer Hasidim, which is a book of halacha, of Jewish law, and not Hasidut. Here we're using the word Hasid to refer to pious, a more literal sense of the word, that interprets this verse in a really interesting way. That this word halicha, movement, is understood about when we pray out in the world. And this is what he says. This is prayer when one is on the way. Like riding on a horse or a wagon, or when someone needs to travel and needs to pray a prayer for deliverance from enemies and ambushers on the path. The rabbis were very concerned about getting struck by bandits on the road. It was something to discuss in tremendous detail throughout various rabbinic texts. So we have a scenario here that, what is this movement that the verse is teaching us about? It's about when we're out in the world, when we're doing stuff, when we're in motion. Or alternatively, when we enter a city and we can't pray with intention because of the hustle and the bustle and everybody's going out and about and doing their thing, or we haven't found a place that feels safe or secure, or the rabbis were very concerned about stuff not being full of garbage, right? That it was an okay place to pray, that we got to find a place to pray. This invites us to recognize that life happens in motion while we're out walking and journeying, that hope is happening when we are doing halicha, when we're walking, when we're moving forward, that a single step might just be the beginning. That every step can be a part of the virtuous cycle that can be a source of hope. That when we think about this concept of movement, that maybe just being in motion can be enough for the time. And so our first part of this framework about seeking is about reaching out to God, to community, but to the work in front of us, and to recognize that hope is found in movement and not in waiting. Right? That's false hope. False hope is hoping everything will work out and I don't have to do anything. That's the first part of our framework here. I know there's a lot of text here, so just marinate in it. You can watch the recording later if you didn't catch it all. It's all good. Now, if we go back to our verse at the very top, sorry, I'm scrolling. I'm going to try not to do that moving forward. Right? We have this idea that we're seeking God, that we're praying to God, that God will hear us. We ask and find God, and we seek God. We lidrosh, right? That's the verb we use for interpret, but it's about to dig deep, to seek those things. There's a verse in Isaiah that says, Dirshu Hashem umihim hi matz'o. Seek God. It says while you can, but like in the finding, right? Seeking God and you'll find God. Kra'uhu b'yato karov. And when you call out, you will be found. God will be found. God will be near karov. It uses almost all the same words we have in our original verse. Now, what's interesting about this is how it's used by the rabbis. In the Talmud, it says it has this verse, it quotes this verse, and it says, this is referring to a time when God is not close. Right? We have this verse, seek God when God can be found, when God is near. And the Gemara says, well, what does this look like? What is the scenario when this verse is applicable? Gemara answers, I'm right here in the middle. There, the verse is referring to an individual to whom God is near only at certain times. We have Rabbi Steinsaltz to help us out here. And here, the verse is referring to a community to which God is close wherever the people call out to God. This is a bit of a crazy concept here, right? How could it be, right, that God can't be found by a person? How is it possible that God could not be found? The Rambam in the Mishnah Torah tells us, and I'm not going to read it inside, that this is referring to tshuva. That even though tshuva is always available, and particularly beloved during Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the process is applicable to a person. Because when a community is doing it, it means that everybody is doing their part. But as an individual, we can only take responsibility for ourselves. And the takeaway here, the framework I want you to walk away from, I know I'm holding a lot of concepts simultaneously, is that tshuva is deeply aligned with our process of engaging with God and with hope. Tshuva is not a one-off. It is the process of ongoing self-refinement. And hope is also like that. It's not something that will replenish itself. It's part of an ongoing practice. That self-refinement of improving yourself can be a part of our hope. This is what striving, this is our language of striving. Striving and seeking God and finding God, striving towards something. What are we striving for? Well, part of it is about improving ourselves so that we can improve the world. I wrote a book the end of last year called A Better World is Possible. It's a little thin volume of meditations. And I wanted to share a brief text from it here, which is the following. When we're powerless to impact the outside world, or we feel powerless, we can spend time working on our internal world. Don't let despair about the world stop you from improving yourself. The future you might be exactly what the outside world needs. Hope is in movement. It's about the process of improving ourselves, of taking each little step at a time, and that improving ourselves, focusing on that self-refinement work, is an act of hope. It might be delayed action, but it's striving for better. Hope is about persistence. Right? If you seek, you will find. That it takes effort and repetition and resilience, the ongoing practice. That's how hope is found. Hope is something we do. It takes work, even when the outcome is uncertain. And this brings us to our final set here, our final text which is this verse, right? If you search for me, you will find me. If you interpret or seek me wholeheartedly, levav, with whole heart. This is the language used. It's in the Shema. The question is, why didn't the text just say lev? Why, with all of your heart? It says levav. This is understood to mean our inner selves. It's not just seek me with your heart, it's seek me with every part of who you are. This verse from Psalms 145 is probably my favorite in the entire liturgy, the entire corpus of Tanakh texts. It's Karov Adonai lechol karav, lechol asher yigru v'emet. God is close to all those who call and call upon God with emet, with truth. To me, I see levav and emet here as meaning the same thing. We call out to God. God is close when we are whole and full of integrity and honest about who we are. Hope requires honesty. It's not pretending that everything is okay. It's about being real with who we are and where we are. The world is chaotic right now, and pretending it isn't a part of real hope. And recognizing where we are in the moment is about being honest about how we can engage with that world. We're not one and done. It's this ongoing journey of being who we are and who we're supposed to be, and showing up in the world like that as well. I want to quote, I'm not going to read the whole thing here, by Rabbi Sarah Hurwitz. Rabbi Hurwitz uses the metaphor of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, that even though after and this is just a quote, she has a much larger piece worth reading on uncertainty, is that the Mishkan building of the tabernacle happened almost immediately after the sin of the golden calf. And yet they still take in the time to build something new. Not only something new, but something that is not going to last forever. It's something that has to be deconstructed and reconstructed over and over and over again. Hope is not about certainty. It's about uncertainty. That sustaining hope is not because we know that things are going to work out exactly right. It's by our commitment to do so. Commitment to self-improvement, self-growth, and to the broader processes that we're a part of. Hope is not about illusion. It's about perseverance and about truth. And I'll just share sort of our final text here. And I know it was a lot of stuff that we talked about. Is actually the text that I was called to at the very beginning when I was starting to unpack what does hope really look like? What does it mean? This is where I went to first. We're going to end with it, which is Min ha-metzar karati Yah. From the narrow place I called to Yah, to God. Aneni b'merchav Yah, who answered me in wideness. This comes from Hallel, from the book of Psalms. It's saying at the Passover Seder a couple of weeks away. I know people are afraid, Passover's coming, but it's okay. Right? Everything will be okay. Hope doesn't emerge after the narrow place, from the distress, the challenge, the struggle. It emerges from that narrow place. Hope is an act of engagement with the challenge. Hope is engagement with the challenge. And so now that I have brain dumped all of these hope texts, these frameworks, I'll invite you to remember where I started, which is our framework here of seeking, calling out to God, engaging in the process, of striving, of taking action and moving forward, and sustaining, to doing so with authenticity and wholeheartedness. And so we'll stop here, we'll pause here just for a few minutes, and invite those of you who wish to share your reflections or thoughts. You certainly can do so in the chat. And yeah, we'll start. Lauren, please.
I really like Jeremiah's interpretation. It stresses self-responsibility, and it stresses self-motivation with the understanding of the context of the Torah, I would like to understand a little bit better how you interpret prayer, because it's a focal. There's some deviation here that may arise, and I'm just trying to understand how you understand prayer.
Yeah. So I think prayer and really digging into our word hitpalal, right? Hitpalel here. The word used in the verse and the word we use for tefillah, right? Those things are interrelated, is understood to be reflexive, right? It's something that's happening in and around back towards ourself. So I think prayer is simultaneously the work of self-reflection, self-interpretation, self-engagement, check in with self kind of stuff, while also recognizing that we're part of something larger, right? We don't frame it as praying to ourselves. We frame it as praying to God. And whether or not you understand God to be nature or life force or whatever, metaphors work for you for God, all of which will work here. We pray as part of something larger than ourselves. And so for me, prayer is holding a paradox. We pray basically by ourselves, but with others. We pray to God, but actually back towards ourselves. And holding those two things in tension, that paradox, I think is part of what hope is about. Hope is a bit of a paradox. You don't know what's going to happen. You have to choose to think something, right? Hope is in the uncertainty. It's in the not knowing, but not leaving it unknown forever. It's by being a part of the process. So to me, those two things, that's how those things fit together. Does that make sense, Lauren? Yeah, cool. Lichvod Arav, Rabbi Streifer.
Thank you. I'm thinking about how empowering this idea is. That hope begins with our own action. A bunch of years ago, I was searching for a great text for a high holiday sermon, and it was the year Michael Jackson died, and I stumbled onto the song "Man in the Mirror." If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself. It was my finest sermon moment. I put on a white glove, the whole deal. The only time people ever cheered for a sermon I gave. But I thought this is a very Jewish idea that changing the world, repairing the world starts with yourself. And it doesn't mean that, if I do nice things, then so will everybody else. What it really means, I think, is like chunking down what's possible, this enormous task, into what I can do, what's within my circle of control, circle of influence. So I find it's a Hasidic idea, it's a Jewish idea, it's a Kabbalistic idea, and it's a pop culture idea, right? But I just find it very empowering to think that hope depends on believing that I can do little tiny things in my small circle of influence here.
Yeah, it makes me think of the saying, "How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time." Right? Hope is the elephant here, right? You just one bite at a time. I don't know what we do with it when we talk about elephants being a wall and a sukkah. That metaphor starts to break down a little, but that's a discussion for later on, maybe next year, 5786. Any other thoughts? Well, I'll conclude us with the following, which is that sort of by way of review, that Jeremiah provided us a framework, that hope begins with seeking and taking the first step, that it requires striving, effort, and persistence, and sustaining through authenticity and wholeheartedness. And we're told, right, even in these challenging moments of exile, that we're here to build, to make connections, to plant gardens, to pray and be engaged in the place where we live. And I think now, and particularly where I don't know where everybody lives, but I'm in the United States, that feels very challenging. So being related in connection to people around me, my neighbors, right? I live in the DC area, but I used to live in Pittsburgh, in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, and a sense of neighborhoodness matters, right? Being a part of a community, and that false hope is passive, but real hope demands action. It's always challenging, right? As Jews, we're always telling ourselves, not to stand still. We got to do stuff, right? Mitzvot are actions, things to do. guess there's a framework of mitzvot where you don't do stuff, as long as I haven't murdered anybody, I'm still fulfilling that mitzvah. So, do with that what you will. And recognizing that hope is in the progress, in the movement, in the walking. One step can be enough for now, right? One step can be enough for now. And that ongoing inner work of tshuva and community is rooted in truth and not pretending that everything is okay, but embracing the uncertainty and moving forward anyway, right? That's the lesson of the Mishkan. And then remembering that hope is doesn't come after the distress, it comes from it. The distress, the challenge, the meitzar, the narrow place, that's where hope springs from. Once we reach the end, the whiteness, we know we were right. We were successful in having hope. And hope is ultimately a journey. It asks us to keep seeking, keep striving, keep sustaining ourselves from that virtuous cycle that is hope itself. And so I want to invite you, as you think about the next week, month, year, between now and Pesach, whatever framework works for you, and I'll put it in the chat here, just to think about what's one thing you can do to practice hope in the next week, right? Hope is a practice. And then I dropped some links here about me, where you can find my stuff. It was an absolute pleasure learning with all of you. And thanks for being here. And I guess have hope would be the best way to end. Thanks, everybody.